Picture a river flowing through an endless desert, a ribbon of life in a wasteland of death. Along its banks around 6000 BC, scattered groups of hunter-gatherers made a discovery that would birth one of history's greatest civilizations. The Nile's annual floods deposited fertile black silt, creating an agricultural paradise in otherwise barren landscape. How did these nomadic tribes transform into builders of pyramids, inventors of writing, and creators of a civilization that would endure for 3,000 years? The answer begins with water. The transformation from mobile hunting parties to permanent agricultural villages fundamentally altered social structures along the Nile. Archaeological evidence from Merimde Beni Salame in the Delta and Badari in Upper Egypt reveals communities that had mastered cultivation of emmer wheat and barley while domesticating cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. These early settlers displayed remarkable sophistication in understanding the Nile's rhythms. Farmers learned to time planting with flood recession between October and December, when nutrient-rich silt provided optimal growing conditions. The development of basin irrigation systems allowed communities to channel and retain floodwater in rectangular plots surrounded by earthen banks, maximizing agricultural yield and supporting larger populations than ever before possible. Storage facilities for surplus grain became focal points of settlements, while specialized crafts emerged as not everyone needed to participate directly in food production. Pottery workshops, flint knapping areas, and textile production centers appeared within villages, indicating birth of occupational specialization that would characterize Egyptian society for millennia. But geography would divide this emerging civilization in two. The geographical division between Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north created distinct cultural trajectories that would profoundly influence Egyptian civilization. Upper Egypt, stretching from the first cataract at Aswan to modern Cairo, consisted of a narrow river valley flanked by desert cliffs. This confined geography fostered tight-knit communities with strong local identities. Lower Egypt encompassed the broad delta region, where the Nile branched into multiple channels before reaching the Mediterranean, creating a landscape of marshlands, lagoons, and fertile islands supporting different settlement patterns. The Badarian culture, flourishing between approximately 4400–4000 BC, represents our earliest clear picture of pre-dynastic Egyptian civilization. Named after El Badari site in Middle Egypt, these communities produced distinctive thin-walled pottery with characteristic rippled surfaces created by combing clay before firing. Badarian potters achieved remarkable technical skill, creating vessels so delicate they appear almost translucent, with polished red surfaces often featuring black-topped rims achieved through controlled firing techniques. Badarian burial practices reveal sophisticated beliefs about death and the afterlife. Bodies were typically placed in shallow oval pits on their left sides in contracted position, facing west toward the setting sun. Personal possessions accompanied the deceased: ivory combs, stone pallets for grinding cosmetics, carefully crafted flint tools. The presence of imported materials like shells from the Red Sea and stones from distant quarries indicates extensive trade networks connecting Badarian communities with regions far beyond the Nile Valley. But even greater cultural advances were emerging. The Naqada period, also known as Gurzian culture, witnessed significant technological and artistic advances that would lay foundations for pharaonic civilization. Named after Naqada site in Upper Egypt excavated by Sir Flinders Petrie in the 1890s, this culture produced pottery decorated with white painted designs on red clay surfaces. These decorations featured geometric patterns, animals, boats, and human figures, providing invaluable insights into pre-dynastic Egyptian life and beliefs. Naqada, or pottery, frequently depicts boats with multiple oars and distinctive high prows, suggesting that river transportation had become crucial for trade and communication between settlements. Some vessels show boats carrying standards or emblems that may represent early territorial markers or religious symbols. The appearance of boats in funerary contexts indicates their symbolic importance in journeying to the afterlife, a concept that would remain central to Egyptian religious thought throughout the pharaonic period. Animal representations reveal fauna that inhabited Egypt before increasing aridity transformed surrounding landscape into desert. Elephants, giraffes, ostriches, and various antelope species appear alongside domesticated cattle, indicating wild game remained important food source even as agriculture expanded. The artistic treatment emphasizes their power and vitality, suggesting early religious significance that would evolve into complex animal cults of later Egyptian civilization. But social hierarchies were emerging that would change everything. The Naqada II period marked a crucial phase in Egypt's development toward political unification. Archaeological evidence reveals increasing social stratification, with elite burials containing substantially more grave goods than common interments. Tomb Uj at Abydos, dating to this period, contained over 400 pottery vessels, many imported from Palestine, along with ivory labels bearing some of the earliest hieroglyphic inscriptions found in Egypt. The elite were rising, and with them the concept of kingship. Naqada II pottery styles underwent dramatic changes, with decorated wares giving way to plain burnished vessels and introduction of wavy-handled jars demonstrating clear influence from Palestinian ceramic traditions. This shift reflects intensifying trade relationships and cultural exchange across the Eastern Mediterranean as Egyptian communities sought luxury goods and raw materials unavailable in the Nile Valley. The period witnessed emergence of large settlements that can reasonably be called towns rather than villages. Hierakonpolis, located in Upper Egypt near modern Edfu, grew to cover over 25 hectares and contained specialized workshop areas for pottery production, brewing, and metallurgy. The famous painted tomb at Hierakonpolis, dating to late Naqada II, features wall paintings depicting boats, animals, and human figures engaged in what appears to be ceremonial or military activities, providing rare visual evidence of pre-dynastic life. Religious beliefs were crystallizing into forms that would define Egyptian civilization. Religious beliefs during the Naqada period centered increasingly on concepts that would become fundamental to pharaonic Egyptian civilization. Animal worship appears to have developed from practical relationships between humans and creatures sharing their environment. Cattle, essential for agricultural work and food production, received particular veneration, as evidenced by elaborate cattle burials and artistic representations emphasizing their sacred nature. The origins of mummification can be traced to natural preservation observed in bodies buried in hot, dry sand. Pre-dynastic Egyptians noticed that corpses interred in simple pit graves often retained skin, hair, and other soft tissues due to rapid dehydration. This natural mummification may have inspired beliefs about bodily preservation being necessary for continued existence in the afterlife, leading to deliberate attempts to enhance preservation through wrapping bodies in linen and placing them in pottery vessels or wooden coffins. The dead were preparing for eternal life. Evidence for early divine kingship appears in increasingly elaborate burials of elite individuals during Naqada II and the Third periods. These burials often included regalia and symbols that would become associated with pharaonic authority: ceremonial mace heads, ivory labels, distinctive pottery vessels. The scorpion mace head discovered at Hierakonpolis depicts a ruler wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, performing what appears to be a ceremonial irrigation ritual, suggesting royal authority was already connected to control over the Nile's life-giving waters. The stage was set for unification. The Naqada III period represents the final phase before dynastic unification, characterized by rapid political consolidation and cultural homogenization throughout Egypt. Archaeological evidence suggests Upper Egyptian cultural forms spread northward into the Delta region, either through conquest, trade, or peaceful cultural diffusion. Distinctive Naqada pottery styles appear at sites throughout Lower Egypt, while local Delta traditions gradually disappeared from the archaeological record. Proto-kingdoms were emerging. These early states possessed administrative capabilities necessary to organize large-scale irrigation projects, coordinate agricultural production across multiple settlements, and maintain trade relationships with distant regions. The development of early writing systems during Naqada III provided rulers with tools for record-keeping and long-distance communication essential for governing expanded territories. Trade networks reached unprecedented complexity, connecting Egypt with Nubia to the south, Palestine and Syria to the northeast, and possibly regions as distant as Mesopotamia. The legendary unification of Egypt under a single ruler, traditionally attributed to Menes or Narmer, represents culmination of centuries of gradual political consolidation. While historical details remain debated among scholars, archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates that Upper Egyptian cultural and political influence had spread throughout the Nile Valley by 3100 BC. The famous Narmer palette discovered at Hierakonpolis depicts a ruler wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolically representing unification of the two lands under a single sovereign. A nation was born. Around 3100 BC, the ruler known to later Egyptian tradition as Menes, identified by modern scholars with the historical figure Narmer, completed the conquest of Lower Egypt and established the first dynasty of a unified Egyptian kingdom. The Narmer palette provides our most vivid contemporary record of this momentous event. On one side, Narmer appears wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, grasping a fallen enemy by the hair while raising a mace to deliver the killing blow. The reverse shows him wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, striding past rows of decapitated enemies whose heads have been placed between their legs in gruesome display of victory. The unification process involved more than military conquest. It required creation of entirely new administrative structures capable of governing a territory stretching over 1,000 kilometers from the First Cataract to the Mediterranean coast. Narmer established Memphis as his capital, strategically positioned at the junction between Upper and Lower Egypt, where the Nile Valley meets the Delta. This location allowed the new pharaoh to control river traffic moving between the two regions while maintaining access to both the agricultural wealth of the Delta and the mineral resources of Upper Egypt. Memphis quickly grew into Egypt's largest urban center, with massive mud brick fortifications protecting royal palaces, administrative buildings, and workshops producing goods for the royal court. The establishment of pharaonic regalia during the First Dynasty created visual symbols of royal authority that would endure throughout Egyptian history. The double crown, combining the white crown of Upper Egypt with the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolically represented the pharaoh's dominion over the unified kingdom. The crook and flail, symbols that would become inseparable from pharaonic imagery, first appeared during this period as practical tools transformed into royal insignia. But governing this vast kingdom required revolutionary innovations. The development of centralized government required sophisticated administrative systems capable of collecting taxes, organizing labor projects, and maintaining records across vast distances. Early dynastic officials created the first comprehensive bureaucracy in human history, with specialized departments responsible for different aspects of royal administration. The Treasury Department managed collection and storage of grain taxes from agricultural estates throughout Egypt, while the Works Department organized massive labor forces required for royal construction projects. Scribal schools attached to major temples trained literate officials necessary to maintain written records. The hieroglyphic writing system underwent rapid development during the early dynastic period, as administrators required increasingly sophisticated methods for recording complex information. Early hieroglyphic inscriptions from First Dynasty royal tombs contain over 800 different signs, indicating the writing system had already achieved considerable complexity. Royal names were written inside oval cartouches that protected the pharaoh's identity from magical harm, while titles and epithets described the ruler's divine nature and earthly responsibilities. Standardization of weights and measures facilitated trade and taxation throughout the unified kingdom. Royal workshops produced stone weight standards based on the Deben, approximately 91 grams, with smaller units called kite representing 1/10 of a Deben. Linear measurements used the royal cubit, approximately 52.5 centimeters, divided into 7 palms of 4 fingers each. These standards were distributed to provincial administrators and market centers, ensuring consistent measurement practices from Aswan to the Mediterranean. But the pharaoh's divine nature demanded something more spectacular. Religious developments during the early dynastic period established theological foundations that would support pharaonic authority for 3 millennia. The sun god Ra emerged as the supreme deity of the unified kingdom, with the pharaoh claiming to be his earthly representative. Solar theology provided ideological justification for royal authority by presenting the pharaoh as the son of Ra, responsible for maintaining cosmic order through proper religious observances and just governance. Ra's daily journey across the sky became a metaphor for the pharaoh's role in bringing light and order to Egypt. Ptah, the creator god of Memphis, gained prominence as the new capital's patron deity. Theological texts describe Ptah creating the world through divine speech, speaking all things into existence through the power of his words. This creation myth reinforced the pharaoh's authority by presenting royal commands as echoes of the original creative act that brought order from primordial chaos. The high priest of Ptah at Memphis became one of Egypt's most powerful religious officials, responsible for maintaining theological foundations of pharaonic rule. Horus, the falcon god associated with kingship since pre-dynastic times, was formally incorporated into royal ideology through development of the Horus name, one of the pharaoh's 5 official titles. Each pharaoh adopted a Horus name upon ascending the throne, identifying himself with this powerful sky god who was believed to inhabit the royal person. The famous Horus and Seth myth, describing the struggle between order and chaos for control of Egypt, provided a theological framework for understanding political conflict and royal succession. But death was approaching for the earliest pharaohs. Royal burial traditions established during the early dynastic period reflected the pharaoh's divine nature and his expected continuation of royal duties in the afterlife. The royal cemetery at Abydos contained elaborate tomb complexes for the first pharaohs, with underground burial chambers surrounded by hundreds of subsidiary graves containing servants, craftsmen, and officials who accompanied their ruler into death. These human sacrifices, unique in Egyptian history, demonstrate the extraordinary reverence accorded to the first pharaohs and the belief that royal authority extended beyond death. The tomb of Pharaoh Jer at Abydos covered an area of approximately 40 meters, with the central burial chamber constructed of mud brick and timber, then covered with a massive mound of sand and gravel. The burial chamber contained wooden furniture inlaid with ivory and gold, stone vessels carved from precious materials like alabaster and porphyry, and hundreds of pottery jars that once held food, wine, and oils for the pharaoh's afterlife sustenance. Subsidiary burials arranged around the royal tomb included 318 individuals. Saqqara emerged as an alternative royal burial ground during the later First Dynasty, with massive mud brick mastaba tombs constructed for high officials and possibly some pharaohs. These rectangular structures with sloping sides and flat tops represented architectural innovations that would influence tomb design throughout Egyptian history. The mastaba of Nebetka at Saqqara contained 62 rooms filled with grave goods, including the earliest known stone vessels carved from hard stones like granite and diorite. Wall paintings depicted daily life scenes, religious ceremonies, and the deceased receiving offerings. The stage was set for architecture's greatest leap. The transition from the early dynastic period to the Old Kingdom marked Egypt's emergence as the ancient world's most architecturally ambitious civilization. The third dynasty, Pharaoh Djoser, initiated this architectural revolution around 2667 BC when he commissioned his chancellor and architect Imhotep to design a burial monument unlike anything previously attempted. The resulting step pyramid at Saqqara represented a quantum leap in construction technology, rising 62 meters above the desert plateau in 6 distinct tiers, a massive stone stairway reaching toward the heavens. Imhotep's revolutionary design abandoned the traditional mastaba tomb structure in favor of a completely new architectural concept reflecting evolving religious beliefs about the pharaoh's divine nature and afterlife journey. The step pyramid began as a conventional mastaba measuring 63 meters, but Imhotep expanded it through successive building phases, first extending it eastward, then adding layers vertically until achieving the final 6-step configuration. The core construction utilized locally quarried limestone blocks, carefully dressed and fitted together without mortar. The subterranean chambers beneath Djoser's pyramid revealed unprecedented complexity in royal burial arrangements. A central shaft descended 28 meters through solid bedrock to reach the burial chamber, which was sealed with a massive granite plug weighing approximately 3 tons. Surrounding this central burial were over 400 rooms and corridors carved from living rock, their walls lined with distinctive blue-green faience tiles that replicated reed matting traditionally used in royal palaces. These underground apartments contained thousands of stone vessels representing the finest craftsmanship of the period. But pyramid building was just beginning. The pyramid complexes extended far beyond the monuments themselves, encompassing elaborate architectural programs designed to provide the pharaoh with everything necessary for eternal reign. The said festival court within Djoser's complex provided a venue for the eternal celebration of the Royal Jubilee Festival. Ceremonial buildings replicated structures from Memphis and other important centers, allowing Djoser to perform essential royal duties throughout eternity. These buildings utilized engaged columns carved to resemble bundles of papyrus stalks and lotus stems, translating organic architectural elements into permanent stone. The workforce required for Djoser's pyramid complex represented massive mobilization of human resources that established organizational patterns for all subsequent pyramid construction. Skilled stonemasons trained in quarrying and dressing limestone blocks formed the core of construction teams, supported by thousands of laborers responsible for moving materials. Recent archaeological evidence from workers' villages near pyramid sites indicates these laborers were not slaves but rather peasants, fulfilling their corvée labor obligations to the state, receiving regular rations of bread, beer, and other provisions during their service. Sneferu, founder of the 4th dynasty, constructed 3 separate pyramids during his 24-year reign, each representing experimental advances in pyramid construction technology. His first pyramid at Meidum began as a 7-step structure similar to Djoser's monument, but was later modified by filling in the steps and adding a smooth outer casing, creating Egypt's first true pyramid with sloping sides. His second pyramid at Dahshur, known today as the Bent Pyramid, demonstrates engineering challenges involved in transitioning from step pyramid to true pyramid construction. The monument rises at an angle of 54 degrees for the lower 2/3 of its height, then abruptly changes to a shallower 43-degree angle. This distinctive profile resulted from structural problems during construction. The greatest pyramid was about to rise. The reign of Khufu witnessed the culmination of Old Kingdom pyramid construction with creation of the Great Pyramid at Giza, a monument that remained the world's tallest building for over 3,800 years. Originally standing 146.5 meters high with a base measuring 230.4 meters on each side, the Great Pyramid contained approximately 2.3 million stone blocks averaging 2.5 tons each, with some granite elements weighing up to 80 tons. The precision achieved tolerances that would challenge modern engineering capabilities, with the base perimeter accurate to within 2 centimeters and orientation aligned to cardinal directions within 3 arc minutes. The internal architecture demonstrates sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles and reflects evolving concepts about the pharaoh's afterlife journey. The original burial chamber carved from bedrock beneath the pyramid's base was abandoned during construction in favor of the Queen's Chamber located within the pyramid's masonry. This chamber was itself superseded by the King's Chamber, positioned high within the pyramid's core and accessed through the spectacular Grand Gallery, a corbelled passage rising at a 26-degree angle and measuring 47 meters in length. The King's Chamber represents the apex of Old Kingdom architectural achievement, constructed entirely of red granite quarried at Aswan and transported over 800 kilometers to Giza. 5 relieving chambers above the burial chamber distribute the enormous weight of the pyramid's upper sections, while the chamber itself maintains perfect proportions based on the golden ratio. The granite sarcophagus within the chamber was carved from a single block and positioned during construction, as its dimensions exceed those of the ascending passages. Construction techniques employed at Giza demonstrate remarkable innovation. Ramp systems, evidenced by surviving stone ramps at various pyramid sites, allowed workers to drag blocks up inclined planes to reach higher levels of construction. These ramps utilized a combination of straight ramps for initial lifting and zigzag or spiral ramps wrapped around the pyramid's growing structure for reaching upper courses. The organization of pyramid construction workforces reveals sophisticated management systems coordinating efforts of thousands of individuals across multiple specialized tasks. Papyrus documents describe work gangs with colorful names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, each containing approximately 2,000 workers divided into crews of 200 men. Archaeological excavations at Giza have revealed extensive infrastructure supporting pyramid construction, workers' villages, bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves daily, breweries, copper workshops for tool production, and medical facilities for treating injured workers. The workers' cemetery at Giza contains over 600 burials of individuals who died during pyramid construction, their skeletal remains showing evidence of heavy physical labor, but also adequate nutrition and medical care, contradicting popular misconceptions about slave labor. The pyramid complexes of Khafra and Menkaure completed the Giza necropolis while demonstrating continued innovation. Khafra's pyramid, though slightly smaller than his father's monument, incorporates sophisticated features, including a complex internal passage system. The associated Valley Temple, constructed of massive granite blocks weighing up to 200 tons each, demonstrates mastery of megalithic construction techniques. The Great Sphinx, carved from a natural limestone outcrop during Khafra's reign, represents the ultimate fusion of royal portraiture with religious symbolism, measuring 73 meters in length and 20 meters in height. But the Golden Age couldn't last forever. The magnificent edifice of Old Kingdom civilization began showing signs of structural weakness during the extraordinarily long reign of Pepi II, who ruled for approximately 94 years from 2278 to 184 BC. What initially appeared as remarkable stability gradually transformed into administrative paralysis as the aging pharaoh lost effective control over Egypt's vast bureaucratic machinery. Provincial governors, originally appointed by royal decree, and dependent on pharaonic favor, began treating their offices as hereditary possessions, establishing local dynasties that competed with Memphis for authority over taxation, justice, and religious affairs. The nomarchs of powerful provinces like Asyut, Heracleopolis, and Thebes constructed elaborate tombs rivaling royal monuments in scale and decoration, openly displaying wealth and independence that would have been unthinkable during the Fourth Dynasty. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout Egypt reveals declining royal authority during Pepi II's later years as provincial officials ceased forwarding tax revenues to Memphis and redirected resources toward local projects. The pyramid complex of Pepi II at Saqqara, though initially planned on grand scale, shows clear evidence of construction shortcuts and reduced quality in workmanship. Climate change compounded the political crisis engulfing Egypt during the late Old Kingdom, as shifting weather patterns in the Ethiopian highlands disrupted the annual Nile flood cycle that formed the foundation of Egyptian agricultural prosperity. Paleoclimatic data from lake sediments and ice cores indicates that the period between 2200 and 2000 BC witnessed significant aridification across North Africa and the eastern Mediterranean. With reduced monsoon activity in the headwaters of the Blue Nile leading to a series of catastrophically low floods in Egypt. The Nilometer records from Elephantine Island document flood levels that fell well below the minimum required for successful agriculture, creating widespread famine and social unrest. Egypt was collapsing. The failure of successive Nile floods created cascading economic and social crises that undermined the ideological foundations of pharaonic rule. Egyptian royal ideology had always presented the pharaoh as the divine guarantor of Egypt's agricultural prosperity, responsible through proper religious observances for ensuring the annual flood that renewed the land's fertility. When the floods failed repeatedly despite royal rituals and temple offerings, popular confidence in pharaonic authority collapsed. Contemporary texts described widespread questioning of traditional religious beliefs and social hierarchies as desperate populations sought explanations for the unprecedented catastrophe. The Admonitions of Ippua, a literary text probably composed during the first intermediate period, provides a vivid account of the social upheaval accompanying the Old Kingdom's collapse. Ippua describes a world turned upside down, where the poor have become rich and the rich have become poor. Servants wear fine linen, while their former masters go naked, and the land spins around like a potter's wheel. The text depicts widespread violence and lawlessness, with blood everywhere and the dead thrown into the river, while traditional social distinctions dissolve. Following Pepi II's death around 2184 BC, the Memphite royal line fragmented into competing claimants who lacked the resources or authority to maintain unified control over Egypt. The 7th and 8th dynasties ruling from Memphis represented increasingly ineffective attempts to preserve the fiction of pharaonic unity while exercising actual authority over progressively smaller territories. Manetho's account describes the 7th dynasty as consisting of 70 kings who ruled for 70 days. Obviously literary exaggeration rather than historical fact, but capturing the chaos. Egypt had shattered into pieces. The political vacuum created by Memphis's weakness enabled ambitious provincial governors to establish independent kingdoms throughout Egypt. The most successful of these regional powers emerged in Heracleopolis, strategically positioned in Middle Egypt, where the Fayum Depression meets the Nile Valley. The Heracleopolitan rulers, constituting the 9th and 10th dynasties according to Manetho's scheme, claimed legitimacy as successors to the Memphite pharaohs, while exercising effective control over territory extending from Memphis southward to Asyut. Meanwhile, in Upper Egypt, the nomarchs of Thebes began consolidating control over the southernmost provinces, establishing an independent kingdom that would eventually reunify the country under Middle Kingdom rule. The early Theban rulers, known collectively as the 11th dynasty, initially controlled only a small territory around modern Luxor, but gradually extended their influence northward through military conquest and diplomatic alliance. Unlike their Heracleopolitan rivals who attempted to preserve Old Kingdom traditions, the Thebans developed new forms of royal ideology emphasizing their role as champions of order against chaos. The struggle between Heracleopolitan and Theban kingdoms dominated the political landscape of the First Intermediate Period, creating a north-south division that persisted for over a century. Contemporary texts describe this conflict in terms of cosmic struggle between order and chaos, with each side claiming divine sanction for their cause. Military technology underwent significant development as regional rulers competed for territorial control. Traditional Egyptian military organization based on conscripted peasant levies proved inadequate for sustained warfare. Regional armies increasingly relied on professional soldiers, and including foreign mercenaries from Nubia and the Levant, who possessed superior military skills. The tide was turning. The gradual reunification process began during the reign of the Theban ruler Intef-Ikik, who expanded Theban control northward from the traditional boundary at Gebel toward the important provincial center of Abydos. Military campaigns involved both siege warfare against fortified towns and naval battles for control of Nile transportation routes. The Thebans' superior position in Upper Egypt provided access to Nubian gold and military recruits, while their control over the traditional religious center of Abydos enhanced their legitimacy claims against Heracleopolitan rivals. The final phase of reunification occurred under Mentuhotep Tseku, whose 51-year reign witnessed the complete defeat of Heracleopolitan resistance and the re-establishment of unified pharaonic rule over Egypt. Military campaigns during the later years of his reign extended Theban control northward to Memphis and the Delta, while southern expeditions secured the Nubian frontier and re-established Egyptian authority over gold-producing regions beyond the First Cataract. The successful completion of reunification around 2055 BC marked the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. Mentuhotep II's architects constructed a massive mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari on the west bank opposite Thebes, featuring a unique terraced design that incorporated elements of both pyramid and mastaba tomb traditions, while establishing distinctly Middle Kingdom architectural conventions. The relocation of royal power to Thebes necessitated development of new administrative structures adapted to the changed political landscape of reunified Egypt. Unlike the Old Kingdom system that had evolved gradually, Middle Kingdom administrators had to consciously design governmental institutions capable of managing provinces that had maintained semi-independent status for generations. A cultural renaissance was about to begin. The cultural renaissance accompanying political reunification manifested most dramatically in the development of classical Egyptian literature that would influence artistic and intellectual traditions throughout the remainder of pharaonic history. Royal patronage of literary production created an environment conducive to sophisticated artistic expression as court scribes and provincial intellectuals competed to create works celebrating the restored pharaonic order while exploring universal themes of justice, wisdom, and human nature. The story of Sinuhe emerged as the masterpiece of Middle Kingdom narrative literature, recounting adventures of a court official who fled Egypt following the assassination of Amenemhat and spent years in exile among the Bedouin tribes of Palestine before eventually returning to royal favor under Senusret I. The text combines political intrigue, adventure narrative, and philosophical reflection in a sophisticated literary structure, demonstrating the maturity of Middle Kingdom Egyptian prose. Sinuhe's detailed descriptions of foreign lands provide invaluable ethnographic information about Levantine populations. The tale of the eloquent peasant represents another pinnacle of Middle Kingdom literary achievement, representing the story of a peasant named Kunanup, whose goods are stolen by a corrupt official, leading to a series of increasingly elaborate speeches demanding justice from higher authorities. The text's 9 separate speeches, each more rhetorically sophisticated than the previous, demonstrate masterful command of Egyptian oratorical traditions while exploring fundamental questions about justice, social responsibility, and the proper relationship between rulers and subjects. But military expansion was also underway. The territorial expansion and fortification programs initiated under Senusret represented systematic efforts to secure Egypt's borders while extending pharaonic authority over economically valuable regions beyond the traditional boundaries of the Nile Valley. The conquest of Lower Nubia during Senusret's reign involved coordinated military campaigns combining riverborne assaults with overland marches through the eastern desert. Egyptian forces established permanent control over the region between the first and second cataracts, constructing massive fortifications at strategic locations. The fortress system constructed in Nubia under Senusret and his successors represents one of the most impressive military engineering achievements of the ancient world. The fortress of Semneh, built during Senusret III's reign at the southern boundary of Egyptian control, featured walls over 15 meters high, constructed of locally quarried sandstone blocks with elaborate gate systems incorporating multiple defensive barriers and killing zones designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined areas where they could be effectively engaged by defensive archers. Senusret III's military campaigns extended Egyptian control further south than any previous pharaoh, with inscriptions at Semneh recording establishment of the southern boundary at the Second Cataract and construction of additional fortifications to secure this expanded frontier. The exploitation of Nubian gold mines under Middle Kingdom administration involved sophisticated mining techniques and extensive logistical support systems that transformed Egypt into the ancient world's wealthiest civilization. Gold extraction operations in the eastern desert required construction of permanent settlements to house miners, security forces, and administrative personnel. But religious changes were transforming society. Religious developments during the Middle Kingdom reflected the democratization of afterlife beliefs that had begun during the first intermediate period, as traditional concepts about divine kingship and exclusive royal access to eternal life were modified to accommodate changing social conditions. The spread of Osirian beliefs throughout Egyptian society represented a fundamental transformation in religious thinking, as the myth of Osiris provided a theological framework for understanding death and resurrection that was accessible to all Egyptians regardless of social status. The Osiris myth, fully developed by the Middle Kingdom period, presented the god as a righteous ruler murdered by his jealous brother Seth, then restored to life through the magical intervention of his wife Isis and sister Nephthys. This narrative provided a powerful metaphor for the triumph of order over chaos and the possibility of resurrection through proper religious observances and moral behavior. The theological implications extended far beyond funerary practices to encompass fundamental questions about divine justice and human moral responsibility. The concept of post-mortem judgment, in which the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at to determine worthiness for eternal life, established ethical standards that influenced behavior throughout life rather than merely at death. This moral dimension of Osirian theology created new relationships between religious belief and social behavior, as individuals were encouraged to act justly, not merely to avoid earthly punishment, but to ensure favorable treatment in the afterlife. But storm clouds were gathering from the north. The gradual weakening of Middle Kingdom central authority during the later 13th dynasty created conditions that enabled foreign populations to establish independent rule over substantial portions of Egypt for the first time in the nation's recorded history. Archaeological evidence from Tel el-Daba, the ancient city of Avaris in the eastern delta, reveals steady increase in Asiatic material culture and burial practices throughout the late Middle Kingdom, indicating significant immigration from the Levant that initially occurred through peaceful settlement rather than military conquest. These Asiatic immigrants, who would later be known to Egyptian sources as the Hyksos, brought with them advanced military technologies that would profoundly influence Egyptian civilization. The transformation of these immigrant communities from peaceful settlers into rulers of Lower Egypt occurred gradually as weakening pharaonic authority created power vacuums that ambitious local leaders could exploit. The process appears to have begun with Asiatic chieftains establishing control over individual delta towns, then expanding their influence through military conquest until they controlled most of Lower Egypt from their capital at Avaris. The military superiority that enabled Hyksos expansion stemmed primarily from their introduction of horse-drawn chariots, a revolutionary military technology providing unprecedented tactical mobility and psychological impact on the battlefield. These two-wheeled vehicles, constructed with lightweight wooden frames and spoked wheels, could carry a driver and archer at speeds approaching 40 kilometers per hour across suitable terrain. The horses that pulled these chariots required specialized knowledge of breeding, training, and veterinary care that Asiatic immigrants possessed, but Egyptians had to learn. The occupation had begun, but resistance was brewing. The composite bow represented another crucial military innovation introduced by the Hyksos that revolutionized Egyptian archery capabilities. These weapons, constructed from laminated strips of wood, horn, and sinew bound together with animal glue, could generate significantly greater range and penetrating power than the simple wooden bows traditionally used by Egyptian archers. Bronze weaponry provided Egyptian warriors with superior cutting and thrusting weapons that maintained sharp edges longer than traditional copper implements, while offering greater durability and penetrating power. Meanwhile, in Upper Egypt, the Theban 17th dynasty maintained independent Egyptian rule over the southern provinces, while gradually developing the military capabilities necessary to challenge Hyksos dominance in the north. The early 17th dynasty pharaohs controlled territory extending from Elephantine in the south to Asyut in the north, encompassing the most productive agricultural regions of Upper Egypt, along with access to Nubian gold mines that provided the economic foundation for their eventual liberation campaigns. The process of military modernization in Upper Egypt involved systematic adoption of Hyksos military technologies and tactical innovations while maintaining distinctly Egyptian military organization and command structures. Theban rulers recruited foreign military advisors to train Egyptian forces in chariot warfare and the effective use of composite bows and bronze weapons. This military transformation required substantial economic investment in horse breeding programs, chariot manufacturing workshops, and bronze production facilities that strained the resources of the Theban kingdom. The liberation wars were about to begin. The gradual military build-up in Upper Egypt culminated in the reign of Kamose, the last pharaoh of the 17th dynasty, who initiated direct military confrontation with the Hyksos kingdom after decades of uneasy coexistence. Kamose's military campaigns, documented in contemporary inscriptions, reveal sophisticated strategic planning that combined traditional Egyptian military strengths with newly acquired technological capabilities. The pharaoh's forces utilized river transport to achieve tactical surprise, while employing chariot units and composite bow archery to match Hyksos military capabilities. The first major engagement occurred near Nephrisi, approximately 30 kilometers south of Memphis, where Egyptian forces achieved a significant tactical victory, demonstrating their successful adaptation of foreign military technologies. Contemporary accounts describe Egyptian chariots operating effectively against Hyksos forces, while Egyptian archers using composite bows provided supporting fire that disrupted enemy formations. This victory enabled Kamose to advance northward toward Memphis, while capturing several fortified towns that had served as Hyksos strongholds in Middle Egypt. The death of Kamose before completion of his liberation campaigns left the final expulsion of the Hyksos to his successor Ahmose I, who would establish the 18th dynasty and inaugurate the new kingdom period of Egyptian history. Ahmose's military campaigns built upon the foundation established by Kamose, while introducing additional innovations in siege warfare and strategic coordination that proved decisive in overcoming Hyksos resistance. The siege of Avaris represented the climactic engagement, involving sophisticated siege techniques that combined traditional Egyptian military methods with innovations learned through contact with Near Eastern military traditions. Egypt was about to become an empire. The successful completion of the liberation wars under Ahmose I restored native Egyptian rule throughout the Nile Valley, while fundamentally transforming Egyptian military capabilities, administrative structures, and international relationships. But the expulsion of the Hyksos marked the beginning of Egypt's transformation from a regional power focused on maintaining internal stability into an aggressive imperial state determined to prevent future foreign domination through preemptive conquest and territorial expansion. Ahmose's immediate successors, Amenhotep II and Thutmose I, systematically expanded Egyptian military operations southward into Nubia and northward into the Levant, establishing territorial foundations of Egypt's new kingdom empire through coordinated campaigns demonstrating unprecedented strategic vision. Thutmose III's Nubian campaigns extended Egyptian control beyond the Third Cataract for the first time, establishing fortified administrative centers that enabled systematic exploitation of gold deposits while securing Egypt's southern frontier. The northern campaigns into the Levant represented even more dramatic departure from traditional Egyptian foreign policy, as these operations involved sustained military action in regions where Egypt had previously maintained only commercial and diplomatic relationships. The successful capture of several Syrian cities and establishment of Egyptian garrisons at strategic locations demonstrated that Egyptian military capabilities now rivaled those of any contemporary power in the ancient Near East. But the greatest military pharaoh was yet to come. The reign of Thutmose III witnessed the full maturation of Egyptian imperial military capabilities through 17 major campaigns that established Egyptian hegemony over the Levant, while demonstrating strategic and tactical innovations that influenced military thinking throughout the ancient Near East. The Battle of Megiddo in the pharaoh's 22nd regnal year represented the decisive engagement that established Egyptian dominance over the Canaanite city-states, involving sophisticated strategic planning that combined surprise attack, tactical flexibility, and psychological warfare to achieve overwhelming victory. Thutmose III's decision to advance his army through the narrow and easily defended Aruna Pass, despite the availability of safer alternative routes, caught the enemy coalition completely unprepared and enabled Egyptian forces to deploy on the plain of Esdraelon before their opponents could organize effective resistance. This strategic surprise, combined with superior training and equipment of Egyptian professional forces, resulted in a complete tactical victory that shattered the anti-Egyptian coalition and established Egyptian control over central Palestine. The systematic exploitation of victory at Megiddo established patterns of imperial administration that would characterize Egyptian rule over the Levant throughout the New Kingdom period. Rather than attempting direct administrative control over conquered territories, Egyptian policy emphasized installation of loyal local rulers who acknowledged pharaonic suzerainty while maintaining traditional governmental structures. This indirect rule system minimized administrative costs while maximizing economic benefits, as tribute payments from vassal states provided substantial revenues without requiring extensive Egyptian bureaucratic presence. But religious revolution was brewing. The revolutionary reign of Amenhotep IV who adopted the name Akhenaten around his 5th regnal year, represented the most dramatic religious and cultural transformation in Egyptian history, as the pharaoh attempted to replace Egypt's traditional polytheistic religious system with exclusive worship of the solar disk Aten. This religious revolution extended far beyond theological innovation to encompass fundamental changes in royal ideology, artistic expression, and administrative organization that challenged basic assumptions underlying Egyptian civilization for over a millennium. The establishment of a new capital city at Akhetaten, modern Tel El Amarna, provided physical manifestation of the pharaoh's religious vision while creating opportunities for architectural and artistic experimentation unencumbered by traditional conventions. The theological foundations of Atenism represented radical departure from traditional Egyptian religious thought, as Akhenaten proclaimed the Aten as the sole creator deity while explicitly rejecting the existence and worship of other gods. So monotheistic innovation eliminated the complex theological relationships between different deities that had characterized Egyptian religion since the pre-dynastic period. The artistic revolution accompanying religious reform at Amarna produced the most distinctive and recognizable art style in Egyptian history, characterized by unprecedented naturalism in royal portraiture and innovative approaches to representing the human form that abandoned the idealized conventions of traditional Egyptian art. Akhenaten's portraits reveal physical characteristics including an elongated skull, narrow shoulders, and pronounced hips that may represent actual physical appearance or symbolic representation of religious transformation, but the experiment would fail catastrophically. The international implications of the Amarna period proved disastrous for Egyptian imperial interests, as Akhenaten's preoccupation with religious reform distracted attention from the diplomatic and military requirements of maintaining imperial control over distant territories. The Amarna letters, a diplomatic archive discovered at Tel El Amarna, containing correspondence between the Egyptian court and rulers throughout the Near East, reveal the gradual collapse of Egyptian influence in the Levant, as local rulers appealed unsuccessfully for military assistance against expanding Hittite power. The reign of Tutankhamun, though brief and occurring during his minority under the guidance of powerful advisors, including the general Horemheb, witnessed systematic restoration of traditional religious practices and the abandonment of Akhetaten in favor of the ancient capitals at Memphis and Thebes. This restoration process involved not only physical destruction of Atenist temples and monuments, but also deliberate efforts to erase Akhenaten's memory from official records while re-establishing traditional religious institutions that had been suppressed during the Amarna period. The famous treasures from Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered virtually intact by Howard Carter in 1922, demonstrate the extraordinary wealth and artistic sophistication of the restored traditional court, while providing insights into religious beliefs and funerary practices of the late 18th dynasty. The military campaigns of Horemheb and the early 19th dynasty, pharaohs Ramesses and Seti, represented systematic efforts to restore Egyptian imperial power after losses sustained during the Amarna period. But Egypt's greatest pharaoh was about to ascend the throne. The reign of Ramesses II represented the climax of New Kingdom imperial power and cultural achievement, as the pharaoh's 67-year rule provided unprecedented opportunities for monumental construction, territorial expansion, and diplomatic innovation that established Egypt as the dominant power in the ancient Near East. The early years of Ramesses II's reign were dominated by military confrontation with the Hittite Empire, culminating in the famous Battle of Kadesh that, despite Egyptian claims of victory, actually resulted in strategic stalemate, leading both powers to recognize the futility of continued warfare. The Battle of Kadesh itself represented one of the largest military engagements of the ancient world, involving over 40,000 soldiers and hundreds of chariots in a complex tactical encounter demonstrating both the capabilities and limitations of late Bronze Age military technology. Ramesses II's personal account of the battle, carved on temple walls throughout Egypt, describes the pharaoh's heroic individual combat against overwhelming enemy forces while his army fled in panic, though Hittite sources suggest a more complex tactical situation in which both sides suffered substantial casualties without achieving decisive victory. The Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty concluded in Ramesses II's 21st regnal year established principles of international law and diplomatic cooperation that influenced subsequent diplomatic practice throughout the ancient Near East. The treaty's provisions included mutual defense agreements, extradition arrangements for political refugees, and detailed protocols for diplomatic communication demonstrating sophisticated understanding of international relations. Successful implementation created a stable international environment that enabled both empires to focus resources on internal development. But even Egypt's greatest age would end. The death of Ramesses around 1077 BC marked the end of the new kingdom's centralized pharaonic authority and initiated a complex period of political fragmentation that would fundamentally reshape Egyptian civilization. Unlike the dramatic collapse characterizing the Old Kingdom's end, the transition into the Third Intermediate Period occurred through gradual erosion of royal power as competing institutions systematically undermined central authority. The high priest of Amun at Thebes had already assumed royal prerogatives, issuing decrees in his own name while nominally acknowledging pharaonic supremacy. Egypt would experience centuries of division, Libyan dynasties, Nubian conquest by the 25th dynasty, brief Assyrian occupation, and the Saite Renaissance of the 26th dynasty, attempting to restore past glories. Persian conquest in 595 BC transformed Egypt into a satrapy of the Achaemenid Empire, though Egyptian revolts periodically restored independence. Then came Alexander the Great in 332 BC, welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. His general Ptolemy seized Egypt after Alexander's death, establishing the Ptolemaic dynasty that would rule for nearly 3 centuries. The Ptolemies made Alexandria into one of the ancient world's greatest cities, home to the famous library and museum that preserved human knowledge, but internal dynastic conflicts gradually weakened Ptolemaic power, making Egypt vulnerable to Roman interference. Cleopatra VII, the last effective ruler, formed alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony in desperate attempts to preserve Egyptian independence. But Octavian's victory at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC and Cleopatra's suicide in 30 BC marked the end. Thus concluded over 3 millennia of pharaonic civilization, from unification under Narmer around 3100 BC to Cleopatra's death. The extraordinary longevity of Egyptian civilization, surviving foreign conquests and internal upheavals, testifies to the strength of institutions developed along the Nile's life-giving waters. While pharaonic Egypt had ended, its influence continues shaping human civilization through contributions to art, architecture, religion, and science that remain relevant today. If this journey through ancient Egypt's rise and fall captivated you, subscribe to Flow of History for more epic stories of the civilizations that built our world.